Welcome to the Arkansas Wildlife Podcast, the official podcast of the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. We are talking hunting, fishing, and conservation, with engaging guests and in-depth discussions with game and fish staff. It's Arkansas Wildlife, the podcast for all things outdoors in the natural state.
Welcome to the Arkansas Wildlife Podcast. I'm Trey Reid from the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. This is the official podcast of the Game and Fish Commission. Thanks for listening in. And if you're dropping in today, you are in for a treat because we have a very special guest. It is not every day that we get to have a member of the United States House of Representatives in our podcast studio here, so we're very happy about that. He is the representative of the 4th District of Arkansas and chair of the Natural Resources Committee, Congressman Bruce Westerman. Welcome.
Hey, Trey, great to be with you and a great subject to talk about. They didn't have to twist my arm too hard to get me to come over and talk about hunting and fishing in Arkansas and outdoor activities.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Natural Resources Chair, background in forestry, the outdoors has obviously been important to you professionally and I'm sure personally as well.
Oh, yeah. I grew up in the outdoors. I tell people all the time that when I was a kid, growing up in very rural Garland County at the time, it was 5 miles to the nearest piece of pavement from my mom and dad's property, which I don't think I realized how blessed I was to live there. I realize it more and more all the time, even though the main road's been paved now. When we wanted to go, my brothers and I, when we wanted to go hunting, we walked over and took the appropriate firearm out of the gun case and walked outside, and we were there.
Just went. You didn't have to travel anywhere.
You traveled by foot.
By foot, right.
And you could hunt all day.
What were some of those things that you were hunting back then?
Everything that was legal to hunt.
That was legal?
Squirrels, rabbits, quail, dove, turkeys, deer. We coon hunt at night. My brother and I, we trapped some.
Oh, wow.
So if you could do it in the outdoors in Arkansas. Now the duck hunting was pretty sparse there in the hills.
Not the best duck hunting country.
Well, we did have a creek with a beaver dam on it, which we trapped some beavers, and you'd get a few wood ducks that would come into the beaver pond. I didn't really get a chance to duck hunt a lot until I got out of the home and went to college. My first job was for Riceland Foods down in Stuttgart.
Oh, well, you had to find a lot of great contacts there.
I got introduced to duck hunting at a very appropriate way down there, and I've loved duck hunting ever since. But I would say if I could only hunt one thing, turkey is the thing that I love to hunt the most. I find it the most enjoyable. But it's all great. It all has its good stuff. I was a kid like most people I grew up with, and we had a very short deer season when I was a kid. You couldn't sleep the night before deer season. It was like it was the thing that you were going to be able to get up and go deer hunting the next morning.
Like Christmas morning almost.
Yeah.
Well, is it that rural upbringing that, from Garland County, that hunting and fishing, is that what got you into natural resources? I mean, because you got a degree in forestry from Yale, and so conservation and resource management is obviously a big part of your life. Is that where it came from?
Yeah, it obviously had a huge impact on it. And I remember as a kid, if you saw a deer track, you would tell people, I saw a deer track over here. I mean, there weren't a lot of deer here in the 1970s. And my dad's property, which he still owns, it was one of the first, it was near one of the first tracks that Weyerhaeuser had bought and did a clear cut on it. And people were upset when they saw this clear cutting happening, and all of a sudden there were deer everywhere. And when you look at the science behind that, what they did was they opened up the canopy. You had all this native vegetation that sprang up, and all of a sudden you have the early successional habitat, and you start seeing way more deer. The turkeys like it. You have coveys of quail in it because the quail population, had kind of started dwindling, but they love these new cutovers. And that really got me interested in the dynamics of what happens when you do something in the forest.
How all that works, right? I mean,
yeah, and it still fascinates me today. And some people see an old forest that has no greenery in the understory, and they think, oh, that's beautiful. Well, a wild game look at that and say, oh, we need to go to the next county because we can't
Right.
survive here.
I want to circle back to something you said, because talking about the misperceptions of the public with forest management. I've heard you speak a lot about it over the years, your years in Congress, but it's something we talk a lot about here at Arkansas Game and Fish. I think it's our timber harvest and timber management, our wildlife management areas, I would say probably one of the most misunderstood things that we do. I just answered a question about it on a radio show yesterday. Like, what do y'all do with all that money? And, we don't really make very much money, and it goes right back in. But why do you think, as somebody who's been in that field, why do you think there is so much misunderstanding about the benefits of selective harvest, of opening that canopy? Why don't people get that?
So I deal with this on a national basis, and people in Arkansas get it way more than people.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, you go to Northern California, Washington, Oregon. I mean, there's still a lot of people there that get it. Now, the Intermountain West. And you look at the places where we see the worst forest fires, and people don't get it. And I don't really fault people for not getting it. The more I look at it, I use the terminology that we love our trees to death.
Yeah.
People love forests so much. They understand that forests play a huge benefit. So when they see somebody cutting a tree, they think, well, this is detrimental. But, nature has its own management tools, wind and fire, ice. And what all forestry is figuring out how to, in a controlled method, mimic what nature does. And you talk about selective thinning. That was really happening a long time before Europeans got to the United States. There's some writings of the early European explorers who went through Arkansas, who went through the Ouachita Mountains, and they described it as like a pine savanna that you could ride your horse at full gait. Now, if you've hiked or hunted in the Ouachita Mountains, think about
good luck with that.
Riding a horse at full gait. You know the horse would survive, but the Native Americans were using fire because it created better hunting grounds, and they were, most fires still begin naturally with a lightning strike, but they would set fire. They knew the benefits. Over time, there's more game where this fire went through a few years ago. And the Forest Service knows this. They've done a tremendous amount of research, a great demonstration project over it's a little community called Needmore over close to Waldron, where they went in and did a shortleaf pine blue stem grass.
Yeah, just that pine blue stem. Yeah.
Well, they did that because the red-cockaded woodpecker was endangered. And, the only way you can help an endangered species is to give it better habitat. Protect it from hunting or whatever may be causing it, illegal hunting or whatever. But if you really want to recover a species, which is what the Endangered Species Act was put in place for, it says in the enabling language to recover species, you have to focus on the habitat. So, all the scientists at the Forest Service, they looked at, what makes great red-cockaded woodpecker habitat? It's open canopy, early successional vegetation on the forest floor. And they did this great project that I want to see mimicked more and more. They went in and harvested timber, sold the timber, and used the money to do the management. So they made the forest healthier and paid for it at the same time. What a novel idea that you could actually use the resource to pay for the management of it. Of course, they had not just foresters, they had all kinds of biologists involved. There's been papers published about this. They saw an amazing increase in plant and animal biodiversity. Some of these seeds had been in the soil for probably 100 years, just covered with leaf duff. They opened up the canopy, used controlled burns, and all of this vegetation sprang up. Now, you can do that with clear cutting. You don't have to clear cut. All you have to do is open it up enough so that you can get the
sunlight,
get the sunlight on it. And it's also moisture. Plants need three things: light, moisture, and nutrients. They're always competing for those three things. And if you have an overgrown forest, the strongest survive is how that works. So the little plants that need to grow in the understory, if they can't get light, they're not going to grow. If you got too many trees, and we categorize that with something called basal area. We know how much basal area per acre a forest can support. If you got too much basal area, there's not going to be enough moisture and nutrients. And what eventually happens, you have this competition. The trees get weakened, then you get insects and disease, and eventually you have fire that comes in to correct everything, and it starts over. But we can control that and create phenomenal habitat in the process. If I say Arkansas has the opportunity not just to provide the greatest outdoor recreation opportunities in the country with our hunting and fishing and beautiful forest lands, plus all the bottomland stuff we got for waterfowl, we could be it could be a huge economic driver where people would see it as a destination to come here and pay whatever for an out-of-state license to hunt deer and turkeys and quail. We've lost so many quail. You could quail hunt when I was a kid, and there were a lot of them there. But now, if I'm out in the outdoors and I hear a quail, I'm like, oh, that's a beautiful sound.
Right.
To hear a wild quail again.
Congressman, how do we seize the momentum and do some of these things that we're doing in Arkansas? And granted, we're different type of forest in the Southeast as there is in the Intermountain West, and I look back, and you talked about we've Native Americans knew some of these things. Gifford Pinchot, the father of the Forest Service, knew some of these things. These things, 100 years ago, but it seems like there's still a big hill to climb in the area of public perception and the will of states and other entities to do that. How do we scale this up, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, that's my job in Congress, and I've been working on this since I got there. I'm continuing to work on it. I have a bill called the Fix Our Forest Act that it's passed the House with huge bipartisan support. It's over in the Senate. We hope to see that get passed and sent to the president's desk to get signed into law. And it's an education process. When I first got to Congress, you didn't meet anybody that really didn't like forest, but you met a lot of people that really didn't have an understanding of forestry and forest dynamics. And, why are the forests in the West burning up? Why do the projects that the Forest Service say needs to happen on these forests get stopped? And it really, I think the turning point was when we lost 20% of the giant sequoias in 2 years. So the giant sequoia, one of the largest trees on Earth, the technical answer to that is a quaking aspen, which is, you could see a whole hillside of quaking aspen, it'd be one tree. But the giant sequoia, iconic, massive trees, some of them are over 3,000 years old, and they only grow on the western slopes of the Sierra Nevadas above 4,500 feet in elevation. It's almost like God said, these trees can grow here, but they can't grow right across this line. They don't spread out. They stay very confined. There's about 70 groves of them. And, these are the named trees, the General Sherman and all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in 2 years, we lost 20% of them due to catastrophic wildfire. And when I was in forestry school, which wasn't that long ago, the thought was fire can't kill one of these trees because some of their bark's 2 feet thick. And it just acts like an insulating buffer. And plus, they've been around for over 3,000 years, and fire's never, the Forest Service has a record because trees are living history books because of the rings, and you can go back and count fire scars. The last giant sequoia that had been killed by fire until 2018 was 1267.
Oh, wow.
So you can see why people thought, well, fire just doesn't kill a giant sequoia. And then of the 20 or so named trees, most all of them have been they've been killed or greatly deteriorating due to catastrophic fire. And this got people's attention. And there's a lot of university research. I got this paper out of Humboldt State University and some other folks, Washington State, they had studied these giant sequoias. And these researchers had actually told me in the spring, before we had these big fires, they said we're gonna lose sequoias. We're gonna have catastrophic fires, and it's because up until the gold rush, the Native Americans had burned these forests about and it was on average of 3 years. These are lightning or with Native Americans. Every 3 years they did a controlled burn. Well, they quit doing that around in the mid-1800s, around the gold rush. Then the federal government comes along and had the idea that we should put out all the fires that happened. So you had well over 100 years of fire suppression in these giant sequoias. And there's a tree called the white fir that it's shade tolerant. It grows very slowly in the shade. Well, those trees would sprout, and a fire would come through every 3 years, and it would kill them off. Well, another one would sprout, and you just had this cycle of the forest floor being cleaned up by these regular fires. And they were low-intensity fires because not that much fuel had built up. So you give it over 100 years, and these little white fir trees had gotten up to 110, 120 feet tall, and the tips of the fir trees were in the lower crown of the giant sequoias. That's what, if you hear the term ladder fuel, that is classic ladder fuel. So the lightning still strikes, you still get fires, but once it got into these white fir trees with dry conditions, and there were some different pine trees that created ladder fuel too, it carried the fire up into the crowns. Now, a fire around the base of a giant sequoia, it says bring it on. Up in the crown, it's a whole different story. So we did it. It was in Kevin McCarthy's district, and we did a field trip, where it was Republicans and Democrats, and all of us were just standing there shocked, looking at a dead grove of giant sequoias, and thinking there's got to be a better way. You know, some of these trees are 3,000 years old, and this has happened on our watch. So with the research, you know, to be able to touch and see. I got a friend named Scott Peters, who's a Democrat in San Diego. He really started working with me in good faith, and we came up with a bill called the Save Our Sequoias Act. It recently passed the House unanimously. We had the Fix Our Forest Act that we would have gotten 2/3 of the votes had it required 2/3 of the votes, but it only required a majority in the House, and it's over in the Senate. Went to Senator Bozeman's Ag Committee. They've passed it. It's got enough Democrats that have voted for it in the Senate that if it gets put on the floor, it'll go to the president's desk. It's, I think, by far the most substantial forest management regulations that Congress has ever passed. We just need to get it across the finish line.
Right.
A lot of other extenuating circumstances there. But it all came back to education and people willing to stop and look at the facts. And the neat thing is we had a lot of environmental groups write letters of support for the Fix Our Forest Act because it's based on scientific management of the forest. And there's this idea that, you know, we're raping and pillaging the forest. And a lot of that happened as our country was being developed and people thought the forest was never ending.
Yeah, an infinite resource, right?
Yeah, they just started on the East Coast and started cutting to the West Coast. They came through Arkansas and had a huge industry here, pretty much cut everything down and kept on going. Well, then all of that grew back, and we still have beautiful forests here in the state. We know how to manage them better. And if we would use the resource that we've got in a wise way, it would be an economic driver and it would be an environmental driver. You know, you're talking about Pinchot having foresight. With Teddy Roosevelt,
sure,
he made comments about if we ever want to develop the West, we have to be good stewards of the forest and the headwaters of the rivers. And Roosevelt called trees the lungs of the earth because they breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. I call them also the kidneys of the earth because they're the best water purifiers. They give us clean water in our streams. They help fish populations. And if you have a catastrophic wildfire where you remove the vegetation, then you not only are you washing all that ash into the streams, you're also washing the topsoil into the streams, which makes the streams less healthy for fish, affects all the downstream water supply. Plus, it's taking topsoil away that you need to grow the new forest back. So keeping our forests healthy gives us clean air, gives us clean water, gives us better wildlife habitat and recreation opportunities, there's no downside to having a healthy forest. And we should all be pulling the wagon in the same way to make sure that we have healthy forests, and we have all different varieties of forest. There's really no such thing as old growth, because different trees have different lifespans. And when you talk about what I think some people think is old growth, you're talking about a tree getting to the end of its lifespan, and they're beautiful to look at, but you better be making sure you got youngins coming up.
Yeah, what happens next?
Yeah, what happens after this? This shortleaf pine tree is 300 years old. It's somewhere around its life expectancy.
Yeah.
And when it dies, what's going to be left behind? So that's all part of forest management. You have seedlings, you have saplings, you have mid-story and overstory, and you can have all of that and do it in a way that benefits wildlife habitat at the same time and protects our air and our water.
Before we get out of here, let you go and wrap things up. You don't have to give away any secret spots, okay, or GPS coordinates. But where are some of your places that you like to enjoy in Arkansas for hunting and fishing? You mentioned Lake Ouachita, but what are some of your spots you like to go?
So, where I grew up is still a very remote area. My dad's been able to buy land over the years. We lease land around that, so we have a deer lease.
Okay.
That's where I go hunting. If somebody mentions going hunting and I think about the best spot to go hunting, it's where I've grown up hunting. I get where I live now. I've got property around me that has good turkey hunting on it.
See, typical turkey hunter, you're getting real tight-lipped all of a sudden.
getting close to some valuable info here. But
go ahead. I'm sorry.
When I was a kid, a big vacation was to go to Branson, the Silver Dollar City. Like what we did, we had an old boat that we would put a tent and camp stove in, and we would go to Lake Ouachita, and we would go out on the bank or an island.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like it. I was able to do that with my kids, some growing up. I know during COVID, I went by myself one time.
Nice.
it was good to do that. And we did, everything from, brim fishing, bass fishing, crappie fishing, trot lines and yo-yos, and there's just nothing like it.
How special is it? And I don't think it's a unique situation, but it is special that you still get to make boot prints in the mud where you did when you were 5-6 years old, running out there with your brother, like you said.
Oh yeah, that's it's always just a lot of memories when you're out there. And in my job, I travel all around and meet people. Just other members of Congress are like constantly inviting me to come go hunting with them or go fishing with them. My committee has jurisdiction over offshore, or all of Fish and Wildlife and NOAA on offshore fishing, commercial, recreational, and subsistence fishing, like in Alaska. So I get exposed to a lot of that, and there's just so many opportunities out there to experience the great outdoors. And the things that I do in the big picture, a lot of people from other places wouldn't think that was that exciting, but it's what I grew up doing. And to me, I'd rather turkey hunt by myself in Arkansas than go on the best elk hunt or whatever somewhere out west.
It's funny how those things that are so close to us, we often take for granted, but like duck hunting, Arkansas is got the best duck hunting anywhere in the world, but it seems it's just what we do here,
Yeah. Now, I've had the opportunity to duck hunt in other places, to turkey hunt in other places, but yeah.
You'll take it here, huh?
I remember the first time you talk about not very good gear, had the kind of the rubberized vinyl waders, hunting on public land in Arkansas in the timber, and wondering I'm not sure what the attraction to this is, to be standing in water where I've got to hold my elbows up so they're not in the water. But man, when those mallards came down through that timber, there's nothing like that.
It's something we have that very, very few places have. Congressman, before we wrap things up, anything you want to add before anything we haven't covered that you would like to?
I just hope everybody in Arkansas realizes how blessed we are to have the landscape, the resources that we've got, to have the opportunities to do public hunting, whether it's on federal land or on the state wildlife management agencies. You know, one of the things that I've done recently, and you'll probably know who my guide was I got invited to go woodcock hunting. And it was on a wildlife management area. And, you know, I'd always, when you fill out your harvest information program, it's like,
nobody ever checks woodcock or snipe.
There's at least two of us that check.
Three. I'm one of them too.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun.
I've been bitten by that, but because it's like you talked about not having as many quail, although we're doing a lot to try to bring them back, as well as a Forest Service on some of the things we've already mentioned, but. That's an upland bird that we can still find pretty regularly.
Yeah. And this particular person told me they taste better than quail and dove, but I've had several people dispute that.
I don't know about that. I mean, they're not bad, but quail's pretty good.
Yeah, but even just the opportunity, you can hunt woodcock in Arkansas if you and on a state wildlife management area.
Sure.
And it's just fun to work on this stuff. A lot of the things I work on are challenging, and the work needs to be done. Last week we were in D.C. and had a markup on the surface transportation bill that went all day and past 2 a.m. in the morning, but we passed the bill out, good bipartisan bill. That's interesting to me, but man, when I get to work on stuff that's dealing with wildlife habitat, on making our forests healthy, it puts an extra pep in my step.
I bet it does. Well, thank you for representing not only the citizens of Arkansas, especially those from the 4th District, but our fish and wildlife and our natural resources that depend on them. Congressman Westerman, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Trey.
That's all we got for this episode of the Arkansas Wildlife Podcast. We'll talk to you next time.